Chapter 336. As he spoke of this, Sean was filled with emotion as he said, since the brothers already missed out on one another for so many decades, perhaps they would have the opportunity to meet in heaven. Then, Harold's father nodded before he said humbly, "Chairman Richard, why don't you come in and take a seat?" Sean nodded before he laughed and said, "All right, then. I am sorry to bother you." "No, you are not a bother at all." Harold's father hurriedly led Sean through the courtyard into the living room. Then, he hurriedly introduced Lady Richard to him. "Mom. This is the chairman of the Tesway Group, Sean Richard." Lady Richard was stunned. Tesway Group? That was an extremely famous public-listed group. Why was the chairman of Tesway Group here in their home? Even though she was very puzzled, she still got up to greet him, filled with excitement. "Oh! Welcome to our house, Chairman Richard. Please forgive an old lady like me for not giving you an appropriate welcome." No, don't worry about it," Sean smiled as he extended his hand slightly. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of Olivia, who had been crying for a long time. Her eyes were red from her heartbroken weeping. As Sean glanced at her, he could not help but feel that this girl was indeed very beautiful even though she had such a pitiful expression on her face. He could not help but feel his heart beating a little faster. Olivia was so depressed that she did not notice the new guest in her house was silently looking at her with greed in his eyes. Lady Richard quickly invited Sean into their living room before saying, "I did not expect Chairman Richard to pay a visit to our house. I am truly honored to have you here as our guest." "You are too polite," Sean smiled before he said, "If I am not wrong, you must be the head of the Richard family, right?" Lady Richard hurriedly replied, "Yes. Chairman Richard, you can just call me Lady Richard. You don't have to be so polite." Sean nodded and said, "The reason why I am here today is that I want to fulfill my father's last wish before he passed away." After that, Sean quickly explained the history that his father had shared with the old man of the Richard family in the past. The ancestral home of the Richard family was located in a small mountain village. Almost everyone in that village shared Richard's last name. In fact, all of them belonged to a large family that had developed for hundreds of years. Since the Richard family had already developed so much, there were thousands of people in their family. At this time, most of them had already exceeded 5 different generations, and they could not be regarded as blood relatives anymore. When they were still teenagers, Sean's father and Harold's father's father were barely related to one another since there were already up to 7 or 8 generations between them. However, no matter what it was, both of them were still very close to one another, and they regarded each other as distant cousins. Later, when the Resistance War began, the Richard family had run for their lives in a panic, and everyone had gotten separated at the time. Fortunately, Sean's father did not lose his life that day. After everyone had gotten separated because of the war, none of them had been able to find one another anymore. When Sean's father had been on his deathbed, he was still asking and instructing Sean to find a way to thank his benefactor on his behalf. However, Sean had not taken his father's words seriously. Even though he promised to help his father, he had forgotten all about the promise he made to his father on his deathbed. It was only until a few days ago when Sean kept having the same nightmare of his old man complaining and scolding him that he suddenly recalled the promise that he made to him. Sean consulted a fortune teller, and the master had told him that his father's last wish was so strong to the point that if he refused to fulfill his wish for him, the old man would continue to haunt him in his dreams. That was the reason why Sean had decided to spend some money to hire some people to look around before they finally found some clues leading to the Richard family in Orris Hill. Upon hearing this, Lady Richard cried out in excitement. This was indeed a light at the end of a dark tunnel. The Tesway Group was a publicly listed group with a market value of tens of billions of dollars. If Sean just snapped his fingers, he would surely be able to help the Richard family and save them from their misery.